So thank you, Leah, for the introduction. As you mentioned before, I'm a PhD candidate at the Texas A&M University Corpus Christi in USA at the Hart Research Institute for the Gulf of Mexico Studies. And I'm introduce you the preliminary results that I have from my PhD. So I will start with that. So the presentation is structured as follows. First, I will introduce a little bit of background on relevance, the purpose of the work, the study sites, the methods in deep, and then how am I using MAXDictio, the next steps on my work, some high-level messages about the expected results for my work, some literature review, and after that, the Q&A questions. So the background of relevance. So climate change, as we know, impacts everything in our planet, but especially impacts cities, and the coastal ones are specifically sensitive of that. And the ones that are coastal plains, that means there are flat plains nearby to the seas or the oceans are specifically threatened by the climate change, because they are sensitive to the sea level rise. Some intertidal habitats like seagrasses, mangroves, dunes, marshes, many. And also the human settlements are sensitive to these sea level rise changes because flooding and sea level rise. So the Gulf of Mexico is one of those coastal plains. And in this map, you can see the height, and the coastal, it's very, very, we don't have a lot of height in between the sea level and the land level. So it's a very threatened and harmful variable that taken in consideration for the future. So coastal cities must need to take some actions to increase the resilience against the climate-induced impacts. And some of the many actions that the cities may take, there are the nature, community, and infrastructure-based solutions. And these solutions have been incorporated in urban planning and agendas with encouraging results, with different levels of they succeed all around the world, but they have succeeded. So specifically for the Gulf of Mexico, HasNot project focuses on strengthening resilience to climate change from a transboundary perspective. Even though it's a sea that is shared by 3 countries, we don't have that as a transboundary ones. So what is the conceptual or the theoretical framework in which I can enclose my work? It's the socio-ecological systems. So it's a very brief explanation, a complex and an adaptive system in which human societies as part of the nature. We need to understand this relationship between the societies and the nature. So, but there are a specific subset of socio-ecological systems, that is the urban ones, that has high population densities, fuel environment, and livelihood that do not depend directly on the harvesting or extracting natural resources, that are part of these socio-ecological systems, and we can understand easily like cities. So the cities we can understand, and urban socio-ecological systems. The other concept that is nodal for my work is the resilience, and we can understand resilience of a system to cope a capacity with a hazardous event, trends, or disturbance by maintaining their essential function. And in this particular case, the resilience, I understand this concept that is built from based on 5 pillars: sociocultural pillar, economical pillar, environmental, infrastructural, and governance, and all of them are working together to strengthen or not the resilience of a system, in this case, cities. And this is the conceptual one, but this is the methodological one, that is the mixed methods. That is a quantitative and qualitative data ordered to gather deeper knowledge about some problem. So in my case, the quantitative part are coming from the data from some urban instruments, and I will talk about more in a moment. What does that mean, urban instruments, and geographic information data. And from the qualitative part, I will conduct some interviews and then transcribe them to gather perceptions from local agents and notes of sites observations. And at this moment, it's very important to mention the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, that happens at least in the university in which I'm studying, because it's an important process for external review for your work, and because it's a directly, or you need to conduct that before you start your work, and because it's for research that are directed to human subjects, guide you to structure your work in an ethical and also methodological way. So I think it's very important to mention that. And for example, some publications now doesn't allow to publish if you don't mention if you have this kind of external review of your work. So what is the purpose of my work? It has a general objective that it's evaluated urban resilience in the context of climate change, risk in coastal cities in the Gulf of Mexico. And we understand again that this sea that is shared by Cuba, Mexico, and US, through analyzing landscape changes, urban instruments, interviews, and observation notes that focus on nature's, community, and infrastructure-based solutions in this time frame, 2002 to 2024. And the main research question is, to what extent have coastal cities in the Gulf of Mexico used these ecosystem, community, and infrastructural approaches in urban planning to strengthen the urban resilience to climate change induced, in particular to flood and sea level rise, framing on the urban socio-ecological system. So for this work, I have 7 research questions. I don't intend to read all of them. I only want you pay attention to the 2 that I highlight in yellow, because there are the ones that I explain in detail about the MAXDictio that I have been using. And these questions are divided if they are answering to gather and analyze quantitative data, qualitative data, or the mixed method question. So the first question is how frequently the nature, community, and infrastructure-based solutions are involved on the urban planning to respond to the climate change impacts in the urban instruments at the local level in the Gulf of Mexico. And the mixed method one is related with the explanatory sequential design that I explain in a moment. That is the integration. So basically, I need to gather quantitative information in order to design the instruments to gather qualitative information. So the first step, and in the one I've been using, the MAXDictio, is to gather and analyze quantitative data to, based on that, continue my work to develop the qualitative data. So what is the study site? This is a map of the Gulf of Mexico. There are the cities that I'm pre-selecting. There are more than 200 cities all around the Gulf of Mexico for the 3 countries, but I need to narrow this universe of cities. So I took 2 criteria, as you can see on the right side of the screen. One is population. All the cities that has more or equal to 100,000 inhabitants in 2020 or more, there are the first criteria to select these cities, and then they need to be located on the waterfront or has a very important sea influence. So after these criteria, applying these criteria, they result 25 cities, 13 in US, 10 in Mexico, and 2 in Cuba. And the map shows you the relative sea level rise, which means is the sea level rise that happens very locally. That doesn't mean that is the global trend all around the world. So that is important because the variation of the sea level rise in this area, if you can see, is very high from the south to the north. So that is something to take in consideration. So now the methodology, I visually showed you a summary of this. So as I mentioned before, the conceptual framework are the urban socio-ecological systems. And inside of this theoretical framework is the mixed method research framework. And I have the case study because, as I mentioned before, there are 3 countries. So I intend to choose 1 city per country, even though I have 25 pre-selected, to go deep in the analysis. So how can I decide which city I may analyze? This is based on the explanatory sequential design. That is one of the design on the mixed methods methodology. And this mixed method design helped me first to selection the case study and then analyzing this within the cases. And because I want also to compare what happened regionally, after conducting this quantitative part, I will conduct a comparison using the convergent design to allow me to compare the cases. And flowing along the whole design, I have the conceptual framework. That means are all the concepts that I'm translating variables or keywords to measure the resilience to climate change in coastal cities. So that leads us to the conceptual model. That is a complex model nesting design mixed method that multiple case studies in which I have the explanatory sequential design first, paying attention or focusing in the quantitative part rather than the qualitative part. And then I have a convergent design in which I pay equally attention to the quant and qual part. So first I need to review the literature review. In a moment, I explain you what is the literature review. Then I gather information of case study locations, and then I start a loop. This loop repeats each case study, the 3 case studies that I mentioned before in each country. And I finish this loop from each case study as soon as I reach the saturation point. So before continue with that, I only want to mention that, as I said before, I using geographic information systems. So this is part of the quantitative analysis. This is GIS based. So basically, from the past to the present, I want to know how has the coastal landscape changed since 1980, because this is based on the geographic information system. And then from the present to the future, how will sea level rise affect landscape in the future with the IPCC models, when trends for 2050 to 2100 using a bathtub model. This is important because it's part of the information that I need to take in consideration from each case and then using to the comparison. So now move on to this part that it's important for this seminar is the content analysis. So these selection case studies is based on a content analysis of urban instruments. So now, what does that mean? This literature review, I have been developed some rubrics or code books about all the concepts that I need to understand and be reflected on my work. The first one are the resilience pillars, then is the climate hazards, the landscape units. It's related with all the ecosystem habitats or land uses that happens on the territory, mangroves, coastal dunes, seagrasses, developed areas, crops and lands, whatever. And then one code book related with each solution that I identify, nature, community, and infrastructure-based solution. Then gather the information. This is when I start looking for urban instruments. What does that mean, urban instruments? All the regulations that the local governments enact to planning or ordinance the territory, to management the territory, to asking for paying taxes of that territories, democratic participation, monitoring and evaluation, and in general, other instruments. And this category of other instruments is important because there are, even though the actions take place at very local level, sometimes other actors are the ones that enact that, not the local governments. For example, federal government, NGOs, community or neighborhood associations, and another community agents that are working on that territory but are not part of the local government. And that is important because, at least in Mexico, that is one of the preliminary results that I found. So as soon as I have these code books and these documents, so I will conduct the content analysis, and I show you in a moment how I conduct that. And as soon as I have these preliminary results of the 25 cities, based on some variables that also I will show you in a moment, I choose one city for each country. So as soon as I choose this city, I took the preliminary results for the content analysis, and based on that, from the lacking on information, or if I want to go deep in some results, I make or design the guides of the interviews and the site observation. So then I conduct the field work, and after conduct the field work and have the transcriptions, I will conduct the thematic analysis for these documents. And a step in which assure me the triangulation and the validation of some of the validation of the work is using as soon as I finish the thematic analysis, using the codes that I found on the thematic analysis, if they apply to the instruments that I review in the first step, and vice versa. The codes that I develop for my content analysis, I may apply to the interviews and the site observation, just in case if looking, there are cross information that I missed. After that, I analyze each case study. If you remember, I have content analysis, thematic analysis, and also the landscape change analysis. So I have 3 sets of data and analysis for each case. Yeah, as soon as I compile all these 3 cases, I may compare them. So this is the last step, the comparison. So this is the conceptual model in detail. So how may I conduct conceptually the content analysis? As I mentioned before, I have the theoretical framework. Then I have these concepts converted in variables in the code books. I create all these code books that I mentioned before. And in closing on this mixed method case study, the quantitative part for me is identifying if there are climate hazard mentioned in these urban instruments, there are landscape units, there are resilience variables, there are nature community infrastructure-based solutions, yes or no. And if yes, I need to understand the context in which they happen. And because sometimes, and we'll explain in a minute, the context is not the one that I'm looking for. So even though appear the word or the keyword, it's not necessary I need to codify for my work. So after that, there are some preliminary questions that I write for after these preliminary results of the content analysis, in which from the qualitative part, I want to characterize and make some assessment of these solutions that the local governments are conducting to face the climate change. So this is all the theoretical one. So now we will go to the MAXDictio. So before I start working on MAXQDA, I need to create some codebooks. So please, you don't need to read all these. I only want to looking for the structure. This is one of the tables that I developed from my code book. There are several of these. Each code that I develop, I make a table of that. So if I don't mention before, my work is bilingual in Spanish and English. So I have the same information in both languages. For that reason, you have 2 columns on the right side. But on the left side, I wanna be detailed with you about how I may put it all this information. First of all, the language. Second, the code. What is the name of the code? Because as I mentioned before, it's in 2 languages, so I try to put it in English as in Spanish in order to gather or know what is, even though I have information in different languages, at the moment of the comparison, I need to do in only one that is English for the purpose of my dissertation. So it's easy to maintain this structure even though they have 2 different languages. Then, in order to have some order, the abbreviation of this code, the level means in which theoretical and conceptual structure there are. For example, this specific code is the floods or inundaciones. So I have the urban socio-ecological system as the level 1, then have a climate change level 2, then I have climate hazard level 3, because I have then hydrological climate hazard, and they have another subsets that are not hydrological, but they are inside of climate hazard. So maybe geomorphological or meteorological ones. But in this case, the 5 level is the floods. So for that reason, I put it how many levels there are on this code. What is the theoretical framework in which it's enlarged? What are the concepts that or the variables that allows me to be operationalized this concept? You put it on the next operational themes. All the, not necessarily the keywords, the concepts that I looking for or I found on the literature that refers for floodings. And then also it's different which kind of keywords do I need to looking for, because some, as you know, even though you have the concepts, not necessarily the concept appears on the instruments or on the documents and you are conducting your analysis. So I create a list of the keywords that I'm looking for on my instruments. And then if I have a short definition for the concept, then a full definition. For example, there are definitions, different definitions for the different kind of flooding. If there are flash flooding, if there are, I don't know, coastal flooding, and so I put it all these kind of definitions in these full definitions to help me at the moment to codifying, knowing what is the difference and if that flooding is the one that I'm looking for or not for my analysis. This is empty because I'm working on now, but when to use, so you put it some notes when it's useful to use it, like when the context is this, you use this code. And also it's a space in which when you not to use this code. So even though you have the keyword identified on MAXDictio or MAXDictio identify this keyword on your documents, is a way in which you have a note in which you say no, because the context is not the one that I'm looking for analyzing. And also, as soon as you go in codifying, you may find some extracts that are the perfect example in which you can use that code, so you can put it on this. And finally, I put the sources of information, and I divide the sources in two. The first one, all the sources of information to nourish this code book, all the literature review that I'm using to looking for these concepts on this list of keywords and definitions from these concepts, I put in them, but also I have a section of my methods. So for example, if something specifically for this flooding is stated in some other methods in which how can codify better, or someone did something similar to my work or whatever, I put it on that. So all these tables are for each code, and I working on that before even though starting to MAXQDA. And after that, I finish these tables, I become some memos on my description of my codes in MAXQDA. So after this madness of information, I translate these Codebooks tables in some supplementary dictionaries in Excel, format to import to MAXQDA. So what is the way that I follow this? I went to MAXQDA, MAXDictio, on the dictionary, I import or download an empty Excel dictionary. And because they have the structure, I start to filling only the information that the dictionary needed. So if you can see in the left column, it's the category. If you remember the structure of my code here in this, the theme categories is the same structure as I follow here in category. So I'm going to the general, to the specific concept, then the search item or the keyword, and then you have a subset of columns in which if you want to be case sensitive, starting letters, categories, etc. It's a binary option, 0 or 1, and if you wanna that be activated or deactivated, and as soon as you finish this, you can import this Excel on MAXQDA. And this is the screenshot in which you can see translated this Excel onto MAXQDA. It become a new dictionary, and you can see here the structure of the code. So as soon as I have this, I may conduct the content analysis. Now I'm ready to conduct the content analysis. First of all, on my MAXQDA, on the group documents, I organize all my information by cities. So I have a folders with each city. In this case, I only conducting the case study of Mexico, so you can see only the Mexican cities. And on my sets of documents or information, I create several ones. First, the country, because I will conduct information from Cuba and US, so I need that. And again, for states, because inside of some states, there are 2 or more cities which analyze, so maybe this is useful to compare not only the cities, but the states all around the coast. The year in which the documents were enacted, and also the document type. If you remember, one of the Codebooks is the categories in which I organize the documents. There are 5. Well, okay, there are more, but at this moment there are 5. And I put it that to help me to understand what is happening and understand my preliminary results. So then I conduct the diction-based analysis in MAXQDA. This is a screenshot of the first using the flood code that I showed you before. I conduct the diction-based analysis, and I have this preliminary table. So then I asked to show me to MAXQDA all the results, and it happened to be plus 2,400 quotes or hints in 76 documents in 10 document groups. So after that, I asked to MAXQDA to auto-code all of them and create a new code that is floods, again, but created from MAXDictio. And this is interesting for me because if you can see the red rectangles at the very right of your screen, there are the names of some documents that are now, if you can see the bottom of your screen, they are organized. What does that mean? The majority or the highest answers to or the appearance of the keywords related with the flood coding are in the number 2 instruments that are management. In management, I gather all the risk and climate change instruments. So that make me some sense, like, oh yeah, the management instruments are important for me in my work. And the next, with 1,600 mentions. Then the next category of instruments that happen to have these a lot of keywords related with flooding are the instruments related with planning and ordinance, with almost 500 mentions, but also other instruments that happen to have a lot of mentions. And at the beginning of my work, I didn't take in consideration was the other instruments plus 200 mentions. And these other instruments, as I mentioned before, they are related not with the local management or local governments. They are from external actors or community actors that taking place actions in the local territories. So for me, that is a very interesting result in which I want to dive more to understand what is happening. And finally, if you can see the bottom right part of your work, I have 2 subsets of codes. So I have the MAXDictio auto coding with 2,000 plus mentions, but also I create my own flood code in which I'm working on now, in which is I need to validate all that auto codes that the MAXDictio give me and review them. And if there are the ones that I'm looking for my analysis, I put it on the flood insurance inundaciones that I create with the structure. And if not, I can delete it. So for me, this is a visual way in which, okay, I have this pending work and I put it on this new code, the ones that I'm validated, and then I can consider for my analysis. So this is the whole view using that I have until now to MAXDictio. So one hint that I want to show you that happened to me is how do I codify a file that contains multiple analysis units in it? For example, I have some documents that inside of them, they have information from 2 or more cities. So I found 2 ways in which I can codify them, and I'm working on test each of them. First is analyzing the structure, analyze the structure text, which means when you are on MAXQDA, you codify in only one document, you create codes for your unit analysis. In my case, I create a code for all the information that inside of that document is for each city. And when I conduct the content analysis with dictionary-based analysis tool, rather than to select for group, document group, I select for document from code, subset of codes. And I ask them like the code 1, the code 2, the code 3, identify these keywords that I have for flooding, for example. And the other one is edit. the documents that I have it, no? So in my case, there are PDFs, so create 3 different PDF if one PDF has information from 3 different units. And basically it's like a divide that document in and become, rather than have 1, have 3, and each one of them, or these 3 pieces of the same document, put it on the document groups that needed to be on each city. So who knows, I need to test both of them, what is better for me, for my work. But yeah, it's something that I found, and I think it's interesting because maybe you face that on your analysis. So as soon as I have all these results, I only show you one of the many rubrics that I have on Codebooks. I create a matrix decision case study in which I have the cities that have more information coming from the documents that I want to analyze. And I have, if they mention the nature, community, or infrastructure-based solution, and also the climate hazard in which I'm interested in, that is flooding and sea level rise. And there are the part that information coming from my documents now. So I start to put it yes or no, or I don't have information about it. And then also I adding, because that information for me at this moment, at that moment wasn't enough to say, yes, I need to select this city. So I start to taking in consideration another variables. For example, the informal scouting with Mexican colleagues, asking them about the security of the area, the opening of the government or the municipality governments, also the logistics that imply to conduct the field work on them. And as soon as I finish this informal scouting with my Mexican colleagues, finally, taking in consideration the content analysis and this extra information, I select the Ciudad del Carmen Campeche. So this is one example. What is the next steps of my work? As soon as I select the case study in Mexico, is design the interviews and the observation guides based on the content analysis. Then is conducting the field work, analyzing the data, and then is repeating the loop from the Cuban and the US case study. Again, gather all the information, analyzing them, scouting with the people, conducting the field work, gather the information, analyzing, etc. Parallel way, conducting the landscape change analysis for each case study, and at the very end, comparing the 3 case studies. What are some high levels of messages of this work? First of all, for this research is framed in the mission of the institute in which I'm studied, as I mentioned before, Hard Research Institute for the Gulf of Mexico Studies. So we have this trinational vision. So science-driven solution for the Gulf of Mexico is important, like the whole system. We want to have some answers for the whole system. So it's intent to evaluate urban resilience from a transboundary perspective. That is a scope that is new in this area. At the end of this study, the results will be incorporated into urban planning and resilience strategies. How? Maybe with some outreach activities at the local level, or also designing and publish in partnership with the local governments and the local agents some best practices for the urban resilience in this system. So I show you some literature review, and thank you very much for your attention. I really, really appreciate it, to the amazing work to the Community Resilience Group at the Hard Research Institute, and also for my family. So if you have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer you. Thank you very much.